Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. We are once again doing another free-to-play champion showcase. For those of you who don't know, the champions selected for this series are actually voted on by you guys, the community. On my community tab page, I always feature a poll after one of these videos goes live, asking you guys who you'd like to see next. And the winner of the most recent poll was Michinaki, which is super fun because he is one of my favorite of all legendaries in the game, and I am uniquely qualified to talk about where he can be used because I have three copies of Michinaki, all of which are built and used on my account. So let's dive into his kit and talk about why this champion is such a damage powerhouse when it comes to PvE. Starting off with the A1, we have attacks one enemy, has a 60% chance when booked of placing an HP burn debuff for 2 turns. We'll come back to this when we talk about his passive and why that's so good and useful. On the A2, we have an AoE attack that has a 100% chance when booked of placing the big version of decreased defense, as well as a chance to place decreased attack if the target is under hex, which is great because that synergizes perfectly with his A3, where he has another AoE, a 2-time hitter. The first hit will remove all buffs from each target, and then the second hit will place hex on them for 2 turns. So he can place the hex, which means he can place decreased defense as well as placing decreased attack, and he can also place the HP burns on the A1. And then the passive, which is kind of his bread and butter ability that synergizes so perfectly with this kit, is that whenever an ally attacks an enemy under hex, this champion has a 50% chance to team up and join the ally's attack. So you just get free A1s just by attacking targets under hex. And once again, he brings hex in his own kit, but it also works with any other hex, including the curse set or hex from any other champion. And so he can put out a significant amount of damage just by joining in on the attacks and placing out the burns, but also just getting free burn damage. So effectively, if the situation lines up, you can actually just get AoE HP burn just because he's joining in on the attacks on everyone who's under hex. He also has a pretty solid aura that is defense in all battles by 30%. So as I mentioned, I am fortunate enough to have 3 Michinakis on my account, and they're all built in a fairly similar way, but I do have one. I guess we'll go through all the builds here really quickly, but I do have one in 4-piece Merciless here with Perception. I do have one here in Relentless and Perception, and then the third one is in 4-piece Merciless again, and then 2 pieces of Speed. Now these are all optimized for Hydra, and that is most certainly one of the most useful areas for him, but honestly he could be used in practically any area of the game because he's just that good. But I'm digressing a little bit. Let's run through the builds, starting off with Michinaki number 1, who is optimized for Nightmare Hydra. So to keep that in mind as we go through the stats: 51,000 on the HP, 4,700 on the defense, 242 on the speed, full crit rate, 250 on the crit damage, and 400 on the accuracy. Again, optimized for Nightmare level of Hydra clan boss. If we go through the masteries, thankfully all of the Michinakis have the exact same mastery, so we only have to do this once, but we are looking at, or we're jumping down the offense tree, hugging the entire left hand side, coming all the way down here and ending on War Master as a T6. And then we're getting a lot of these kind of standard debuffer stuff on the support tree, making sure to pick up Sniper to increase the chance of the HP burn on the A1, and then Master Hexer to extend every single debuff that he does. And then nice to get Cycle of Magic sometimes just to get a little bit, get quicker, get back to his abilities quicker, but obviously the Merciless set also does that as well. And then for the Blessing, I opted for Brimstone. On my Hydra teams, I like to have at least 1 Brimstone across the team, but obviously, as we'll see on Michinaki 2, Nature's Wrath is most certainly a good choice as well because he does have a significant amount of debuffs, so he's going to get a decent amount of damage. And then Michinaki 3, I just happen to not have a Blessing for him yet. But Michinaki number 2 here is in, like I said, Relentless as well as Perception, and this is the Brutal optimized Michinaki, so we'll see that again reflected in the stats. 48,000 on the HP, 4,700 on the defense, 228 on the speed, so he's a little bit slower, but that's just the extent of my Relentless gear. Full crit rate, once again, 224 on the crit damage, and then 323 on the accuracy, once again, optimized for Brutal Hydra. And then lastly, Michinaki 3 is once again in Merciless, but this time with a speed set to combine. And note that his amulet is not yet 16, so there's a little bit of crit damage missing from the build, but nonetheless, 41,000 on the HP, 4,100 on the defense, 245 on the speed, full crit rate, 220 on the crit damage for now, and then 280 on the accuracy. And this Michinaki is optimized for hard Hydra. So I'm not going to make you guys watch a bunch of Hydra runs just to showcase him, but we will see him in action a little bit later. But I have run all of my Hydra teams already. You can see that here, and we'll just talk about his contribution relative to each of the teams. So this is my Nightmare team. You can see that we did 169 million damage, and you can tell that the heavy hitters on the team are Michinaki himself, Wallmaster Atharan, as well as Husk. From a percentage perspective, Michinaki did about 25% of the overall damage on the team, and it is worth noting, of course, that he does have Hex on the squad, meaning that he is getting credit for any and all single target and AoE attacks when there's Hex out there. So a decent amount of that is from, of course, the enemy max HP champions, but it all adds up even from the small attacks from everyone else on the team, on top of the fact that his passive grants him the power to do the ally attack 50% of the time. I must admit, I do believe that on this particular run, Michinaki was the first to die, which contributes to his damage being a little bit lower than I would expect. But honestly, that is kind of one of like the blessing and the curses of running him, because he does so many different things for a Hydra team that if and when he dies, it's kind of a big problem some of the time. You know, you lose your Hex champion if you don't have a curse set or some other Hex champion to back him up. He also does the buff strip, so you might not have buff strip anymore. He can be your debuffer for decreased defense as well as decreased attack in the rest situations. And of course, the HP burn helps just do damage overall, but also can help you bypass a little bit of poisoning cloud if you happen to set things up right. So having him die can be a big problem. In this particular case, I think there was some bad RNG with poisoning cloud and some devouring, and the enemy max HP was just not enough to free him. But he also kind of died near the end of the run, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. But maybe they would have pushed to like 180 million damage instead of 170. Popping down to the brutal team, we can see that he did significantly more damage. The team overall did around the same damage, surprisingly, as the Nightmare run, 174 million, but he did a lot more of it. So 40% is the percentage of the damage he did relative to the team. We still get, of course, the credit from the Hex, but he's also kind of splitting that a little bit. As you can see that AO Street is in a curse set, and that is predominantly why her damage is so high. So they are splitting the Hex splash damage, but of course Michinaki is getting a lot of credit from taking a bunch of extra turns by being in Relentless, so that is adding up to a lot more damage on top of course, the ally attacks from the passive and whatnot. An aspect that this particular team is lacking is enemy max HP damage, and so that most certainly would blow him out of the water in terms of overall damage, just because that adds up to a lot more, and then you would get a little bit of credit of that from the Hex. But since this is all basically raw damage from this squad, that is why he's kind of taking the cake and showing everybody else up. And then lastly, on the hard team, you can see him almost going toe-to-toe with my Harima, who notably is 6-star awakened. He has literally no blessings so far on this particular Michinaki 3. So 60 million damage is about 30% of the overall damage done to hard. You can see there 194 million. So he's close to carrying the team, and honestly he would probably do a lot more if I had Nature's Wrath on him, although in this case I'd probably go with Brimstone, just because again I like Brimstone on every single team. But yeah, he's basically giving Harima a run for her money. Now it is worth noting that Harima is in lethal, so she's going to probably do a lot more raw damage than he can put out, and of course he's getting a lot of credit for Hex damage from the other DPS. They're doing a lot of work from themselves, so his damage is somewhat inflated, but there's also the benefit of him once again being in the Merciless set, so he also has the reflex-esque effect of getting the cooldown reduction on skills when dealing damage, and so that leads to him doing a lot more AoEs overall, and then A1s whenever he happens to not have the proc, but also of course he gets the A1 credit from the ally attack by placing the Hex. You guys get the idea. So while everyone's first thought when it comes to Michinaki is of course his prowess in Hydra, I think he's a lot more versatile than it seems, and we'll talk about other areas that he can be used while we run through the super fun stage of the Michinaki showcase with some protection from Riho as well as some CC from Crowd and the Blue. So we'll have that running in the background. So since we're in Doom Tower, I might as well start off with Doom Tower. Michinaki is a great debuffer for Doom Tower. He could be used on the waves. He could be used against a lot of the bosses. The ones that come to mind are the Griffin, super good because a lot of meta for the Griffin is like ally attack champions. Obviously you get the innate ally attack from the Hex passive, or the synergy with the Hex on his passive, and then he's just good in ally attacking by placing HP burns. He's not good against like Magma Dragon because of course he turns HP burn to continuous heal, so you don't want to run him, stuff like that. But he can also be useful in the Nether Spider. He can remove all the counterattacks from all the minions unless you're allowed to do AoE damage to the spiderlings and kind of deal with it that way. And basically, anywhere else you just want to do a little bit of damage, he could be useful in Dark Fae. Even though he doesn't have a lot of turn meter control, he can help you debuff your clones and deal with that. And yeah, when it comes to dungeons, he can basically take the role of any debuffer across any dungeon. Double AoEs means he's a decent candidate for like a stun set and stuff like that. He can work in that regard. But again, generally speaking, he could just be a debuffer for the waves to help you get to the boss, and then he can also help you do some damage to the boss once you get there. The dungeons that come to mind in terms of his utility would definitely be Dragon, for example, and like Ice Golem, where the burns would be a little bit more useful. He's obviously going to do some work in the Cursed City. Again, hybrid of being able to do some damage, but also a decent amount of debuffing capability. And then Demon Lord is probably one of his most underrated areas. He's one of the highest performing legendaries when it comes to Demon Lord clan buff. boss, just because, again, you're getting a lot of extra attacks with the passive, with the Hex Energy. You're getting HP burn and stuff like that. So he's definitely up there as one of the best DPS for Demon Lord Clan boss. So don't underestimate him for your unkillable team or anything like that. And then lastly, of course, Faction Wars. He's going to be useful in Faction Wars. He's a debuffer, he's a DPS, etc. So yeah, if you can pair him with an increased defense champion like I was able to do on some of my Hydra teams, Archbishop Pinthroid did it for the hard team, and then Tuhonorak did it for the Nightmare team. He's obviously going to do a lot more damage overall just because you're increasing his damage boosting stat. And then building him out in these utility sets is definitely where you can get the most out of him. I am a huge fan of the Merciless build. I'm a huge fan of the Relentless build. The Reflex also works, but if you don't have any of those sets, then basically where I happened to start with my first Michinaki was just like crit damage and perception, just to optimize them to have enough accuracy for a Nightmare level Hydra and also do a decent amount of damage. So you can start from the bare bones, kind of speed perception until you kind of get going somewhere, and then you can start to transition more into the more end game sets once you get them. So you don't necessarily have to copy the builds as they are, but it is something you can work towards as as you progress through the game, getting close to the end game. And I guess unfortunately it wasn't even paying attention, but we seem to have lost one of our Michinakis. I couldn't tell you which one it is. I think it's Michinaki 2, but yeah, nonetheless, kind of fun running this in the background. But the army of Michinakis taking on a Doom Tower secret room there. So super fun there. It just occurred to me that the Celestial Griffin is actually in this rotation of the Doom Tower. So as an added bonus, I swapped him into my existing Griffin team and we can see him a little bit more in action. So let's go ahead and run this. As I mentioned, this is basically my normal Griffin team, which I typically run on rotation 2 when I'm farming Guardian gear. This is rotation 3. So Dark Fae kind of takes the cake as far as taking all my silver keys. So it's a little bit higher of a priority, but nonetheless, he can most certainly work in this composition. And I most certainly tried him out when I was trying to figure out and optimize my rotation 2 team. So his slot was usually or typically was Vlad, the Nightborn, the Void Affinity previous fusion champion. He works a little bit better as a kind of wave control debuffer hybrid, kind of like Michinaki can do, and he just has like the turn meter suppression, which kind of helps them helps the enemy mobs not take turns and allows us to just kill them a little bit more efficient for clearing the waves. But regardless, you can see there about 40-ish seconds to get through all of the waves. And then when it comes to the boss, I guess a little bit of note about how my Griffin team works. I make sure everyone starts off with the A1s because the Griffin leads off by stealing buffs, so we don't want to place a bunch of buffs if they're just going to get stolen off of our team. So we have Ninja in here as our DPS, or one of our DPS. We have Rotos in there as a DPS. We have Michinaki subbing in as our DPS, and then we have Brogni, who is protecting us from any of the debuff reflections that the boss will do. And then we have an ally attack from Lonotharl, who can help us do a lot of extra damage there, taking advantage of all the buffs that Brogni is putting out. And then hopefully we get a little bit of Hex from Michinaki, so we get to see his ally attack passive in action. There we go. A little bit of that going in, a little bit of free damage. And yeah, like I said, I tested between him and Vlad, and just overall, Vlad was a little bit faster on average for the teams, and so that's why I settled for him in the end. But they were pretty comparable, I must say. So it's not much slower than my original team, as you can see there, but 10 seconds per one is noticeable when you're running it a bunch of times over the course of the month for the rotation of the Doom Tower. And so I obviously settled on the slightly faster champion who can get through the waves a little bit quicker and have a similar amount of time or similar kill time on the boss. And just a quick side note here, I have been considering doing like a Doom Tower bosses revisited type of series, just because, for us end gamers, we do consider this to be kind of old dead content that we've kind of figured out at this point. But I also know that there's definitely a lot of newer players who are probably going through Doom Tower for the first time, and they may or may not understand exactly how to beat all these bosses, at least in the modern era of 2024. So let me know in the comment section down below if you'd like to see Doom Tower bosses revisited and just kind of taking a fresh look at how to take them on in the modern era. So there you have it. That's going to be the free-to-play champion showcase for Michinaki. And I just realized that I kind of forgot to walk through some of the gear pieces. Like I said, they're all built in a very similar way. So they're all going to have accuracy on the banner, crit damage on the amulet, defense on the ring, speed on the boots, looking for accuracy and crit rate, defense, crit damage, etc. Defense on the chest, crit damage on the gauntlets, crit rate, speed, crit damage on the shield, stuff like that, accuracy, speed, crit rate, and then accuracy, speed, crit rate. So all that type of stuff. We're looking for crit rate, speed, and enough accuracy for whatever level of dungeon you're going through. So that is ubiquitous across all three Michinakis. They're just in different gear pieces, but the builds are identical, and then their accuracy is optimized for each level of Hydra in my case. But you, of course, can optimize that for whatever stages or bosses you happen to be dealing with. As I said at the beginning, Michinaki is one of my favorite champions ever ever added to the game. I wanted him as soon as it came out because I knew he would be an absolute beast in Hydra, and I happened to get the first one because they had a guaranteed event for him, a summon rush where you can get all of his fragments from that. And then over the years, I just happened to pull a couple of more, and I saw no reason to not use them, one on each Hydra team, because again, he does so many amazing things for Hydra, but also he can be useful in a lot of different areas in the game if Hydra is not your primary focus. Let me know in the comment section down below your thoughts about Michinaki. Do you happen to have him? How have you built him? And where do you use him? As I said at the top of the video, you guys decide which champions are featured in this series, so feel free to hop over to my community tab page and vote on the poll for the next champion to be showcased on the free-to-play champion showcase. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. It really does help out the channel, and if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to hit that subscribe button down below as well for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.